My name is Marjorie Hale, and at 70 years old I've learned that silence can keep peace, but also sharpen cruelty. I've always been steady reserved, the sort of woman who listens more than she speaks, who believes that dignity is something you wear as firmly as a coat. That night in Charleston, though, my silence ended. The Gilded Magnolia was the kind of restaurant I'd walked past many times, but never entered. Its windows glowed golden against the cobblestones, reflecting chandeliers that swung gently above velvet curtains. Inside, the air carried the hush of money, the clink of crystal, the whisper of polished shoes on parquet floors. And there, at the long mahogany table, sat my daughter, Elise. Tall, sleek her hair. A glossy curtain of chestnut wore a red dress that looked as if it belonged on the cover of a magazine. She leaned toward her husband Grant, laughing softly, as if the room were hers. My grandchildren Ethan and Lily sat straight-backed, watching their parents with careful eyes. I had arrived with hope, even excitement. Elise had said, "Mom, join us for dinner. We have something to celebrate." I thought perhaps it meant a new closeness, an open door I had longed for, but as I walked toward the table, my steps careful on the polished floor, I saw it, no chair set for me. I paused beside Elise, my smile tentative. Where should I sit? She didn't look at me at first. Then, with a glance sharp enough to cut glass, she said loudly enough for the room to hear, "Go eat outside on the street, Beggar." The words rang like a slap. For a moment, the restaurant froze. The music from the baby grand piano faltered. The hum of voices stilled. I felt the blood rush to my face, my heart drum against my ribs. My own daughter's voice had never sounded so cold. I inhaled deeply, drawing in strength I didn't know I still had. Straightening, I motioned toward the hovering waiter, who looked more shaken than I was. My voice came steady, almost calm. "All right," I said, the sound carrying through the hushed room. "But then you will be the ones to leave." Crystal glasses trembled on their stems. All around eyes turned toward us. Elise's laughter died, and for the first time in years, she looked uncertain. When I think back to the moment I first walked into the Gilded Magnolia that evening, I realize the insult began before a word was spoken. It began with the absence of a chair. The maitre d', a man with silver hair and posture so stiff it looked painful, had greeted me with professional courtesy. "Good evening, ma'am. May I help you?" "I'm here for my daughter's party," I'd replied. "Elise Hale reservation at 7. He consulted his tablet, then gave a nod of recognition. "Of course, this way." I followed him across the dining room, my heels clicking too loudly on the floor. The tables gleamed under soft light, every surface polished to perfection. Waiters in tuxedos moved like dancers carrying trays of champagne and delicate plates. I smoothed the skirt of my dress, the dark green silk that had been hanging in my closet for years. It wasn't new, but it was the finest thing I owned, and I had chosen it carefully, believing my daughter would be glad to see me looking my best. The maitre d' stopped at a long table in the center of the room. "Here we are." Elise looked radiant under the glow of the chandelier, laughter spilling from her lips as she leaned toward Grant. He was the picture of Charleston affluence tailored navy jacket cufflinks that caught the light, a voice pitched to carry without sounding loud. Ethan and Lily, still in their teens, sat on either side of him, dressed neatly, their faces composed. It was only when the maitre d' stepped aside that I saw it. The table was set for 4. Crystal glasses, white china, silver utensils, all perfectly arranged, but only 4. For a heartbeat, I thought there had been a mistake. Perhaps the chair had been moved to make space. Perhaps they'd asked for another table. I searched for an empty place setting, waiting to be pulled up. There was none. I steadied my voice. "Hello, Elise." Her eyes flicked toward me, quick as a match strike, before she returned to Grant. "Ah, Mom, you made it." She didn't rise, didn't kiss my cheek, didn't even shift her chair. Grant glanced at me with a smile that seemed more amused than welcoming. "Mrs. Hale," he said smoothly. "What a surprise." A surprise, I asked, confused. Ethan's fork clattered against his plate. He bent to retrieve it, and I caught the flicker of red on his cheeks. Lily sat very still, her eyes fixed on the glass of water in front of her. I turned back to the table. "I don't see a seat." Grant chuckled low and polished. The reservation was for 4. Perhaps the restaurant misunderstood. But the maître d' looked startled, even uncomfortable. He opened his mouth and closed it again, his gaze shifting toward me with something like pity. "Elise," I prompted softly. Her smile tightened. "Mother, you'll forgive me, but this dinner was meant for family." The words sliced deeper than she intended, because to exclude me was to declare that I was no longer part of that circle. The silence stretched. A waiter hovered with a bottle of wine, unsure whether to pour. His eyes darted between us as though he'd stumbled into something indecent. Grant finally leaned back, crossing his arms with ease. "You know how it is, Mrs. Hale. This place has a certain standard. Seating's limited." The implication hung heavy in the air. I did not belong in a room where standards were measured in income and image. I swallowed hard, forcing the heat down my throat. I could feel the eyes of other diners grazing me, polite but curious, waiting for me to retreat. My hand brushed the back of the empty chair beside the next table, and for an instant, I imagined pulling it forward, forcing myself into their space, whether they wanted me or not. Instead, I drew a breath and let it out slowly, keeping my spine straight. The waiter set the bottle down with trembling hands. He didn't speak, but his eyes met mine soft, with something Elise's never carried any more recognition. It was then, even before Elise hurled her words across the table, that I knew cruelty had already settled into her smile. The emptiness of that missing chair opened a door in my mind I hadn't stepped through in years. Behind Elise's hard smile and Grant's cultivated charm, I saw the younger girl she once was, the girl who used to curl on the couch beside me, asking me to braid her hair while we watched old movies. That girl had vanished somewhere between adolescence and ambition. I remember the first time I noticed shame in her eyes. She was 15, waiting for me outside her high school gym after a debate tournament. Most of the parents idled in glossy sedans' engines, purring under the Charleston sun. I arrived in my dented Corolla, my work badge still clipped to my blouse from the evening shift at the library. Elise's face tightened when she spotted me. She opened the passenger door quickly, sliding in with her eyes cast down. "Could you park around the corner next time?" she whispered. People were looking. I pretended not to hear the sting in her voice, but it lodged deep in me. By the time she turned 17, Elise had friends with names like Whitaker and Langston, children of bankers and realtors. Their mothers carried handbags worth more than my monthly rent. I worked extra shifts, often closing the library at 9, then heading to a night desk job at the university archives, just to cover the private lessons Elise begged for piano French fencing. She said they would help her fit in. I wanted her to have every chance I never had. I paid for those lessons with blistered feet and bleary mornings nodding off over library catalog cards. I told myself it was worth it, because she smiled more when she could slip into conversations about summer programs in Paris or recitals at Spoleto. But each new circle she entered seemed to push her further from me. When she met Grant in college, I should have seen where it was headed. He came from a family that measured worth in square footage and last names etched on brass plaques. At our first dinner together, he complimented Elise's ambition while glancing at me as though I were furniture. His suit was crisp, his voice careful, but there was a faint note of superiority threaded through everything he said. Elise drank it in like champagne. Soon, she stopped introducing me to her friends at campus events. I became my mom. spoken with a shrug, a shadow she tolerated. I didn't complain, though I saw the pattern forming. The harder I worked, the less she wanted to be reminded of where she came from. One night when she was home from college, I left for my third shift that week at the diner down on Meeting Street. She stood in the doorway, arms folded. "You don't have to kill yourself like this," she said. "I'm fine," I told her, pulling on my jacket. "But you look tired. You look old." I forced a laugh. "That's because I am old. Tuition doesn't pay itself." She turned away with a sigh. "Grant's family thinks I should focus on internships, not worry about money. They don't understand why you keep working like this." That night, wiping down counters while my bones ached, I understood the truth. Elise no longer wanted to see my effort. She wanted only the result, the life it could buy her, polished and free of me. Sitting in the restaurant now, watching her glitter in her red dress, I could trace every step from that girl in the Corolla to this woman who refused me a chair. She had built her place in the world on my weary hands, and each sacrifice I made seemed to give her one more reason to forget me. The waiter with the wine bottle still lingered beside us, his hand hovering uncertainly. His name tag read Caleb. I remembered him faintly from another visit, though he didn't let on. His eyes darted to me as if asking for permission before he poured. "Yes, go ahead," I said gently. My voice felt steadier than my heartbeat. Caleb filled the glasses for Elise and Grant first, then turned to me as though by instinct. Elise intercepted him with a flick of her hand. "No, she won't need one. Water is fine." A hush slipped over the table. Even Caleb seemed startled, his knuckles whitening on the bottle's neck. He looked at me again, waiting. I gave him a small nod, and he poured without another word. It was a silent act of defiance, so subtle Elise didn't see. But I did. The restaurant itself had begun to notice. Forks paused, mid-air snippets of conversation hushed. Crystal chandeliers caught the tension like prisms reflecting it across the polished silver and glass. Diners tried not to stare openly, but their eyes strayed curious and uneasy. Grant leaned back with that smooth smile of his. "It's not that we don't appreciate you, Mrs. Hale, but you understand this isn't exactly familiar territory." "Territory," I repeated softly. He gestured around the room with his glass. "Places like this. The price of one meal here could cover what a month of your rent." More perhaps, his tone was pleasant, almost conversational, but I heard the knife in it. Elise laughed too brightly. "Grant, don't embarrass her. Mom knows she lives a little differently. She's always been frugal." She let the word hang in the air as though it were quaint, almost laughable. I kept my eyes on the linen napkin folded on my lap. I didn't trust myself to meet hers. My modest apartment. The bus pass in my wallet. The discount store dresses that carried me through years of work. All of it suddenly felt dragged into the open, examined under the chandelier light, like something cheap and unworthy. But then Caleb stepped forward again, quietly adjusting my silverware, aligning it with care, as though to remind me I belonged at this table as much as anyone. Behind him, I caught the restaurant manager watching. His name was Mr. Whitlow, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a dignified bearing. Our eyes met briefly. He inclined his head, not as one does to a customer, but to someone recognized. Elise didn't notice. She was busy telling Grant about a new gala invitation, describing the gowns she might wear, the people she hoped to impress. Her voice carried sharp against the hush that had settled. I lifted my glass of wine, holding it with deliberate calm. My hand did not tremble, though my heart ached. Whatever Elise saw when she looked at me, it was not the whole story. And as the servers moved quietly, respectfully around our table, I realized the truth in this room, glittering with crystal and silver strangers, saw more of me than my own daughter did. Elise's laughter rang just a little too loud, sharp enough to cut through the restaurant's soft piano notes. She turned her gaze on me, eyes bright with the same fire I had once seen when she was a teenager arguing to stay out past curfew. But this was no curfew battle. This was dismissal, deliberate and cruel. "Mother," she said, her voice pitched high enough for the neighboring tables to hear, "you don't belong here. Not in this place. Look around you. This is not your world." The words dropped like a stone into the quiet air. My cheeks burned as if she'd struck me. Around us, forks hovered mid-air, conversations stuttered to a halt. The chandeliers glittered above like 1,000 watching eyes. Across the table, Ethan shifted uncomfortably. His hands tightened around his napkin until the linen bunched into a wrinkled knot. He leaned toward me, his voice a whisper, no louder than breath. "Grandma," that single word, half plea, half apology, was the only kindness at the table. Lily kept her gaze down her shoulders, tense, as though she could disappear into the crisp folds of her dress. I breathed in deeply, holding the air in my chest until the trembling in my hands steadied. Elise thought she was building herself taller by pushing me lower. What she didn't realize was that I had learned the strength of silence long before she was born. I placed my napkin on the table, folding it with deliberate care. "The waiter?" Caleb hovered uncertainly with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Behind him, I saw Mr. Whitlow, the manager, step closer. His presence was quiet but firm, as though he were waiting for my signal. "Elise," I said, my voice calm enough to make her blink. "I prepaid for this dinner. Every course, every glass, every plate." Her smile twitched, uncertain. "Yes, and I continued, letting my words carry through the room. "I will not pay to be humiliated in public. I will not buy my own exclusion." Gasps rose from nearby tables. One woman covered her mouth, another shook her head slightly, her eyes locked on Elise. Grant leaned forward, his polished composure slipping. "Marjorie, don't be dramatic. It's just a misunderstanding." "No," I said firmly. "It's clarity. If you believe I don't belong here, then none of us belong at this table tonight." I turned to Caleb, who was frozen mid-step. "Please cancel the service," I told him gently. "The dinner is over." For a moment, no one moved. Then, as if released from a spell, Caleb inclined his head and withdrew. The murmur in the restaurant swelled, diners whispering behind hands, their eyes flicking from Elise to me. Elise's face flushed deep crimson. "Mother, you can't just—" "I can," I said, rising slowly from my chair. My knees ached, but I stood straight. "I've done it all my life. I have worked, sacrificed, and endured, and I will not endure this." Ethan's chair scraped softly as he half stood, uncertain whether to follow me. His eyes, wide with something like shame, searched mine. I rested a hand on his shoulder briefly, the only reassurance I could give him in that moment. Grant hissed under his breath, "You've made a scene." Perhaps I had. But for the first time in years, it was a scene of my choosing. I gathered my purse, lifted my chin, and walked past the still tables and watching eyes. The chandeliers caught in the green silk of my dress as I moved, and the hush that followed me felt heavier than the dress itself. At the entrance, Mr. Whitlow inclined his head again, lower this time, with the solemnity of a bow. No words passed between us, but I understood. Respect, quiet and unspoken, still existed in this room, even if not from my own daughter. And as the night air met my face outside, cool and damp with the scent of the harbor, I felt the line draw itself in stone. I would never again pay for a seat at a table that did not want me there. The night air hit me like a wave of salt damp with the harbor's breath. I stepped into the parking lot, clutching my purse tighter than I meant to. The steady hush of tires on the cobblestones seemed louder than the restaurant chatter I'd left behind. My legs ached, but I kept walking until I reached my car, the old Corolla with its faded paint and stubborn door hinge. Mother Elise's voice cut across the night. I turned slowly. She stormed toward me, heels clicking like hammers, Grant a few steps behind her. Her face, flawless under the streetlights, was twisted with fury. "You embarrassed us," she spat, each syllable sharp. "In front of everyone, you humiliated our family. Do you have any idea what that looked like?" I steadied myself against the car door, not out of weakness, but to anchor myself. "No, Elise," I said, keeping my tone even. "You embarrassed me. You humiliated me. And you did it with intent." Grant folded his arms, his polished calm cracking at the edges. "You overreacted. If you'd just sat quietly, none of this would have happened." "I won't sit quietly," I replied, my voice louder. Now the words carried on the humid air. "Not when I'm told I don't belong. Not when I've been asked to pay for the very meal used to shame me. I won't fund my own exclusion." Elise's mouth opened, then shut again. She looked briefly at Grant, searching for a cue. He gave her a dismissive shrug, as if this were beneath him. "You've twisted this," Elise said finally. "All I wanted was for you to see how successful people live, to understand the life we've built." I let out a brittle laugh. "Successful people. Elise, success without respect is just glitter on rot. If this is the life you've built, then it's a house on sand." Ethan's voice startled us. He had slipped outside, unnoticed, his thin frame caught in the glow of the entry light. His eyes darted between his mother and me. "Mom," he whispered, "please stop." Elise spun on him. "Go back inside." But Ethan didn't move. His gaze clung to mine, wide and uncertain. And in that look was the echo of the little boy who used to run into my arms when scraped knees needed comfort. I gave him the faintest nod. He lowered his eyes and retreated slowly, leaving the three of us in the open air, our breaths heavy with words unsaid. Grant finally exhaled in exasperation. "Come on, Elise. She's made her point. Let's just go." She hesitated, lips trembling with rage, then turned back to me. "You've ruined tonight. Don't expect me to forget this." "I don't expect you to," I said. My voice came quiet, but it carried. "But don't expect me to forget either." Her heels clicked angrily as she stalked back toward the restaurant, Grant trailing behind with the stiff indifference of a man unwilling to dirty his hands. When they were gone, the weight of my body seemed to double. My hands shook as I slid into the driver's seat, closing the door with more force than intended. The silence in the car was suffocating. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, the old leather cool against my skin. For a moment, I let myself tremble. My heart raced with the leftover fire of confrontation, and I felt the sting of tears at the corners of my eyes. Years of longing for inclusion, years of swallowing small slights had led to this moment. But as the trembling eased, a steadier strength settled in its place. Tonight, Elise had drawn a line meant to cast me out. What she didn't know was that I had the power to draw lines too, and mine would not be crossed. I straightened, wiped my cheeks, and turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered before catching steady as my breath. The road home stretched dark but certain. The drive home felt longer than it was. Charleston's street lamps blurring into amber streaks on the windshield. By the time I pulled into the small lot behind my apartment, my hands had steadied, but my chest carried a storm that tea or rest would not calm. I climbed the narrow stairs to my unit, set my purse on the table, and for a long moment simply stood there in the stillness. The room smelled faintly of lavender. From the sachets I tucked in the drawers, an old habit meant to soothe. Tonight it felt like a reminder that even the smallest things I tended to held more care than the way my daughter treated me. I flicked on the lamp beside the worn sofa and went to the desk in the corner. The drawers stuck a little before sliding open, revealing neat folders I had arranged over the years. Utility bills, tax statements, health papers. At the bottom lay the one marked living trust. I carried it to the desk's surface and sat down. The pages smelled of paper and ink, of years of planning for a future I had assumed would belong to Elise. I flipped through until I found the section that named her as my primary heir. My breath caught as my eyes traced the letters of her name. It felt almost like betrayal to see it there after what she had said tonight. I took out a notepad. Slowly, deliberately, I began to write. Change 1, remove Elise as primary beneficiary. The words looked stark against the yellow lines. I pressed harder with the pen as I wrote the next line. Change 2, reroute educational funds directly into Ethan and Lily's 529 accounts. I had already started those college savings years ago, adding modest amounts whenever I could. But tonight made the decision clear Elise would no longer control the pipeline. My grandchildren deserved support, untainted by their mother's pride. The third note took longer. I stared at the blank space, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the old building. Finally, I began to write. Change 3, add letter of wishes. The words that followed poured out of me as if they had been waiting all along. Respect is the condition for involvement in my estate. If my daughter chooses to treat me with dignity, she may have a place in my affairs. If she continues to demean me, she will be excluded entirely. My assets will be directed to my grandchildren and to causes I believe in. My hand trembled, but the ink flowed steady. When I set the pen down, I felt lighter, as if I had taken back something Elise had tried to strip away: my authority, my worth, my right to decide the terms of my life. The phone sat silent on the table, its screen black, though I knew Elise might call eventually. Perhaps to scold me, perhaps to smooth things over just enough to keep her hands near the money. But the thought didn't wound me anymore. Tonight had shifted something permanent. I placed the updated notes into the folder and slid it back into the drawer, ready to take them to Mr. Chambers, my attorney, in the morning. He was an old colleague of my late husband, a man who valued clarity above sentiment. He would help me put these changes into binding form. As I stood, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. A 70-year-old woman, lines etched by years of sacrifice, shoulders bent slightly, but not broken. The same woman Elise had tried to exile from her table. I turned off the lamp. The apartment fell into darkness, but for the first time in years, I felt I was not the one living in shadows. By morning, the fury of the night before had dulled into something quieter, but no less sharp. I brewed my coffee, set it on the windowsill, and watched the seagulls circle above the harbor. Their cries carried more honesty than the voices I had heard from across the dinner table. The phone buzzed on the counter. A new message from Elise lit up the screen. Let's not make drama. What happened last night doesn't need to go further. Families fight, but we move on. Just remember, appearances matter. I read it twice, then set the phone down without replying. The words were polished, as always. Not a hint of remorse, only concern about how things looked. Elise had never been short on eloquence, but when the gloss was stripped away, what remained was hollow. I left the phone face down and tried to busy myself with the laundry, folding worn towels into uneven stacks. But the silence pressed in thick as fog. I kept thinking of Ethan's eyes the night before, wide, restless, too old for his 14 years. The phone rang. I froze, certain it was Elise again, ready to press her version of peace onto me like wallpaper over cracks. But when I checked the screen, it was Ethan's name. The call went to voicemail before I could lift it. His voice, when I pressed play, was unsteady, but earnest. Grandma, it's me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for last night, for the way Mom talked to you. It was wrong. I don't know why she does that. I didn't know what to do, but I should have said more. I should have stood up. Please don't think I don't care. I do. I love you. I'll do better next time. The message ended abruptly, as though he'd run out of courage. I sat down at the kitchen table and let his words wash over me. They weren't polished or strategic. They didn't care about appearances. They were raw, the kind of words spoken when the heart stumbles faster than the mouth. I closed my eyes, remembering the boy who used to sit on my porch steps, licking the last sweetness from a popsicle stick legs, swinging, asking me to tell one more story about when his mother was little. That boy was still in him, perhaps buried under the weight of Elise's sharp expectations, but alive. When I opened my eyes, Elise's message still glowed cold on the screen. Let's not make drama. It was the language of image, of control, of smoothing edges that should not be smoothed. There was no recognition of harm, no acknowledgement of the knife she'd twisted. Only a mask firmly in place. Ethan's voice, on the other hand, cracked at the edges, but rang true. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering between his name and hers. I didn't call either. Instead, I pressed save on the voicemail. Some words deserved to be kept replayed when doubt tried to creep in. The laundry sat unfolded. The coffee had gone cold, but I felt steadier than I had in days. Elise's voice might try to rewrite the story, but Ethan's voice reminded me I hadn't imagined it. Respect had not vanished from the family entirely. It still had a foothold. Fragile though it was. I closed the phone and carried the towels to the shelf. My hands no longer shook. I set the old oak table with 3 mismatched mugs and a plate of butter cookies from the corner bakery. The apartment smelled faintly of lemon polish, though I hadn't intended to impress. I wanted them to see me as I lived, without chandeliers, without waiters in tuxedos, without velvet curtains. Just a mother at her kitchen table. When the knock came, it was brisk. Elise stepped in first coat, draped over her arm, her perfume sweeping in with her. Grant followed posture, stiff as though he'd been dragged into a courtroom he thought beneath him. Mother Elise began, her tone clipped. I hope this is quick. We have a dinner later. I gestured to the table. Sit, both of you. They exchanged a glance but obeyed. Elise smoothed her skirt before sitting. Grant leaned back as though the chair were borrowed and fragile. I folded my hands, steady. I asked you here because last night wasn't the first time I've been made to feel unwelcome in my own family. It was only the loudest. Elise's jaw tightened. Are we really rehashing? Yes, I interrupted softly. We are. Because you've built a pattern of exclusion, and tonight I'm naming it. The clock on the wall ticked. I drew a breath. Your wedding, Elise. Do you remember the message you sent me that I'd feel uncomfortable because of how elegant the venue was, that perhaps it was better I didn't come? Elise's lips pressed thin. That was years ago. Grant leaned forward, smirking faintly. It was practical, Marjorie. Those events are about presentation. Status matters. I looked at him directly. Status matters more than a mother's presence on her daughter's wedding day. His smirk faltered, but Elise rushed in. It wasn't like that. We had clients there, and colleagues and I raised a hand. Then last Christmas, the dinner party you said was only for close friends. I spent the evening alone while you toasted with neighbors you've known less than 2 years. Color rose in Elise's cheeks. You're twisting it. And your birthday, Elise? I went on, my voice firmer. The one where Grant told me there was a dress code. That I shouldn't come unless I had something appropriate. Do you know what it feels like hearing that from your own child? As though the clothes I wear make me unworthy of celebrating your life. Grant shifted, suddenly fascinated by the floor. Elise's shoulders stiffened. You make everything sound cruel. We were trying to manage impressions. That's all. Impressions, I echoed. Is that the family you wanted to build, one that looks polished from the outside, but leaves its own mother at the curb? The words hung between us like smoke. Elise stared at the cookies on the plate, untouched. Grant's fingers drummed once, then stilled. You embarrassed us last night, Elise said finally, her voice brittle. That restaurant is part of our world. And you. She stopped short, but the meaning was clear. I embarrassed you. I leaned in my palms flat on the table. Elise, you've spent years erasing me, pretending I don't belong. The truth is, you've been embarrassed of me, of where you came from. And last night, the mask slipped enough for the whole city to see it. For the first time, Elise looked away. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I'm not here to fight, I said more quietly. I'm here to tell you that respect is not optional. It is the rent for a place in my life. Without it, the door closes. Grant straightened. That's a harsh line to draw, Marjorie. I met his gaze evenly. Then consider it drawn. Elise's fingers tightened around her mug. She didn't drink. She didn't meet my eyes. The air in my apartment was thick with everything left unsaid. Elise sat, rigid. Grant leaned back with that guarded indifference he wore like armor, and I could feel the weight of years pressing down between us. The cookies on the plate remained untouched, the steam from our mugs long since faded. I'm not closing the door entirely, I said at last, my voice steady but low. But the way things have been cannot continue. If there's any hope for rebuilding, it won't be on the old terms, not on the foundation of appearances and silence. Elise gave a dry laugh, though her eyes betrayed unease. You're making this sound like a contract negotiation. In a way it is, I replied, because respect is not given freely anymore. It has to be earned back. There will be conditions, clear ones. Grant raised an eyebrow, half amused. Conditions. For your own daughter. For anyone who wants a place in my life, I said sharply. The words came quicker now, shaped by weeks, even years of quiet endurance that had finally broken. There will be structure, and you'll either choose it or you won't. Elise folded her arms, chin tilted high. Go on then. What are these rules of yours? I drew a breath, feeling the gravity of what I was about to lay down. First, weekly visits. You come here to me. No talk of money, no arguments about appearances. Just time. A meal, a conversation, something real. For 1 year. Her lips parted, ready with protest, but I continued before she could interrupt. Second, you and Grant both will spend 6 months volunteering. There's a training kitchen on East Bay Street run by a nonprofit that teaches young people culinary skills. I've supported it for years. You'll serve there not as guests of honor, but as workers. Aprons on hands in the work. Grant let out a scoff. You want us to ladle soup for runaways? That's absurd. Absurd, I repeated quietly. Do you know what's absurd, Grant? A man who thinks charity work is beneath him. A woman who thinks her mother's chair is expendable. 6 months, or there's no bridge between us. Elise shifted uncomfortably, but still clung to her composure. And the third, 2 family counseling sessions, I said, with a mediator. To say aloud the things we've buried under polished smiles and cold silences. You don't have to like it, but you'll show up. Together. The room went still. Elise's eyes narrowed, her posture bristling. So this is my penance. Weekly dinners in your cramped apartment soup kitchens and therapy sessions. You think humiliation will fix anything? I shook my head. Not humiliation. Humility. And there's a difference. She gave another sharp laugh, but it cracked at the edges. I watched her glance toward the door, already rehearsing her exit. But then Ethan appeared in the frame, quiet as shadow. I hadn't even heard him follow. He stood just inside, hands in his hoodie pocket eyes, soft and searching. Mom, he said gently, it's not that bad. We could try. His voice wasn't pleading, it was hopeful. It was the voice of a boy who wanted his family to heal, who wasn't hardened yet by status or pride. Elise looked at him, and for the briefest moment, something in her expression softened, like a mask slipping. Her gaze flicked back to me, and I held it steady. The silence stretched long enough for the clock to tick 3 times before Elise finally spoke. We'll see, she muttered. No promises. I let out a quiet breath. It wasn't acceptance, not yet. But it wasn't outright refusal either. Somewhere between resistance and surrender, a narrow bridge had been built, conditional, fragile, but real. The counseling office smelled faintly of chamomile tea and paper. A round clock ticked above a bookshelf, marking each minute louder than any of us wanted to admit. Elise sat with her arms crossed, legs crossed, even her eyes crossed in their impatience. Grant leaned back in his chair, his expression fixed in practiced neutrality. The counselor, a calm woman named Dr. Keene, adjusted her glasses and smiled gently. We're not here to assign blame, she said. We're here to name what hurts and to ask what healing might look like. I nodded. That sounds right. Elise scoffed. Healing? I didn't come here for therapy language. I came because my mother has decided to make family a performance with conditions. Conditions? Dr. Keene repeated softly. Do you feel they're unfair? Elise's eyes flashed. Unfair? Yes. Imagine being told to earn your own mother's respect. Imagine being told you're not good enough as you are. I steadied my voice. Elise, you've spent years reminding me I wasn't good enough as I am. At your wedding, at birthdays, at dinners, I wasn't invited to. Elise shot up from her chair, her coat already in her hand. I'm not doing this. The door swung shut behind her before Dr. Keene could respond. Grant gave a thin smile as if to say, this proves my point, and followed after her. I sat there a moment longer, Dr. Keene watching me with quiet sympathy. She's not ready yet, I murmured. No, Dr. Keene agreed, but sometimes it takes more than one story to crack the surface. That evening, the training kitchen smelled of garlic and roasted peppers, the clatter of pans louder than usual. Elise had insisted she'd show up, perhaps out of pride, perhaps out of defiance. She wore a crisp blouse under her volunteer apron, as though her wardrobe could buffer her from humility. We moved through the stations, Grant chopping vegetables with the unease of someone unaccustomed to knives. Elise stirring a sauce while checking her reflection in the steel pot. I worked alongside a young trainee named Marcus, maybe 19, his hands quick and confident with the cutting board. During a lull, Marcus began to talk. You know, he said, wiping his brow, I used to cook for my mom. Tried to get her attention that way. Thought maybe if I made something she liked, she'd sit with me for a while. But she never cared. Always had someone else more important to see. After a while, I just stopped trying. His words were casual, but they landed heavy. Elise, who had been reaching for a ladle, froze. Her hand lingered in the air before slowly settling the ladle back down. Marcus laughed softly, though without joy. Funny thing is, now I cook here every day for strangers who appreciate it more than my own family ever did. I watched Elise out of the corner of my eye. Her posture had changed, the tightness in her shoulders, slackening into something less guarded. For the first time all evening, she didn't look at her reflection, or at me, or at Grant. She looked at Marcus. Really looked. She didn't say anything, but when the session ended, she lingered longer than usual, standing by the door with her arms folded differently. This time not in defiance, but in thought. As we walked back to the parking lot, her steps were slower, less sure. The night was cool, and she pulled her coat tighter around herself. For once, no words came. But I had seen something flicker in her eyes when Marcus spoke, something unsettled, something fractured. A story of neglect had brushed against her pride, and though the crack was faint, it was there. The following week, Elise arrived on time. Not early, not late on time. It startled me more than if she'd shown up with flowers or apologies. She stood in the doorway of the training kitchen, her hair tied back, apron strings unevenly knotted, and for once, no polished veneer in her posture. I'm here, she said, almost gruffly. Marcus handed her a stack of trays to scrub. Dish pit duty, he told her, without ceremony. Elise opened her mouth, surely ready with protest, but caught herself. She carried the trays to the sinks without a word. From across the room, I watched as she rolled up her sleeves and plunged her manicured hands into the sudsy water. The sight was strange, my daughter, elbow deep in the work she once called beneath her. For the first 20 minutes, she moved stiffly, like a woman acting out a role, but as the steam rose and the rhythm of scrubbing set in her shoulders lowered. Her breath steadied. By the time Ethan joined us, tying his apron too loosely as usual, Elise's cheeks were pink from the heat of the dish room. He grinned at her. "Never thought I'd see you here, Mom." She nudged him lightly with her elbow. Neither did I. That afternoon, the kitchen's big pot simmered with vegetables and broth, the smell filling every corner. I guided Ethan through the steps, showing him how to stir without scorching the bottom. Elise came up beside us, watching quietly at first, then rolling her sleeves again. "Can I try?" she asked. I handed her the wooden spoon. Her grip was awkward, but she stirred slowly, careful not to splash. Ethan leaned against the counter. "Teasing Grandma makes it better." "Of course she does," Elise said, surprising me with the gentleness in her tone. "It's hers." Later, back at my apartment, Ethan helped me carry in groceries while Elise lingered at the table. She picked up a stack of old recipe cards I had set out, faded index cards with my handwriting crooked from years of use. "What's this?" she asked, flipping one over. "Dinner instructions," I said simply. "But more than that, really. Each card has a note. Memories, small stories. I started writing them years ago so you and now Ethan and Lily would know the history behind the meals." She read aloud softly, almost to herself. "Sunday roast first made after your father bought the oak table. Lily was teething, wouldn't let go of my dress." She turned another card. "Peach cobbler summer storm power went out. We lit candles and ate it cold, laughing." Her fingers lingered on the smudged ink. You kept all this." "Yes," I said, folding a bag of flour into the cupboard. "Because food isn't just food. It's family. It's who we were, who we are." I didn't want those pieces to vanish. For the first time in years, Elise's eyes softened in a way that wasn't defensive, wasn't calculating. She traced the edge of a card with her thumb, and I saw the girl she once was, the girl who used to sit on a stool beside me, licking cake batter from the spoon, laughing when flour dusted her nose. Ethan leaned in, tugging at the cards with curiosity. "Grandma, can we make some of these together?" "Of course," I said. Elise looked up, then meeting my eyes. Something trembled in her expression, as if she wanted to speak but didn't trust her voice. Instead, she set the cards down carefully, like they were fragile glass. She came back the next week on time again. This time she didn't wait to be assigned. She tied her apron and headed straight for the sinks. Small proofs, not grand apologies, not sweeping gestures. Just presence, effort, a willingness to stay. Whether it was the beginning of real change or just another performance, I couldn't yet tell. But for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope. By late spring, the rhythms of the kitchen had almost become routine. Elise arrived most weeks on time, tied her apron with less fuss, and even laughed with the younger trainees when broth splattered or onions made eyes water. I watched her with careful distance, grateful for her presence, cautious of her motives. One Thursday afternoon, though her chair at the prep station sat empty, I thought perhaps she was running late until my phone buzzed with a message, "Mother, I won't be at the kitchen tonight. I've been invited to the St. Cecilia Society Gala. It's important for Grant's business connections. We'll make up the shift later." The words felt like a cold draft through the room. The gala was the very symbol of Charleston's status. The velvet dresses, the marble halls, the circles Elise had always chased. I folded the phone closed without replying. When Ethan arrived, I handed him a ladle, my face tight. He stirred the pot in silence until finally asking, "Where's Mom?" "At a gala," I said simply. His shoulders slumped. He stirred harder, splashing broth onto the stove. "She promised." The trainees glanced over, but no one said anything. The clang of pans filled the silence she had left behind. Later that night, Ethan lingered at my apartment, refusing his ride home until Elise came for him. When she finally walked through the door, sequins still glittering on her dress, Ethan's eyes hardened in a way that startled me. "Mom," he said, voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "You told Grandma you'd be here. You told me, too. And she kept every promise to you. Everyone. Even when you didn't deserve it." Elise froze. Her clutch bag slipped slightly in her hand. For once, she didn't have a quick reply. Ethan pushed past her, heading for the bedroom where his backpack waited. The slam of the door echoed like judgment. Elise stood in the quiet, her shoulders heaving once before she lowered herself into a chair at the kitchen table. She smoothed her dress as if to erase the evidence of where she'd been. "I thought it wouldn't matter. Just one night. It always matters," I said, my voice low. "Consistency is the only way bridges are built." She nodded slowly, her hand trembling against the sequins. For the first time, her grandeur looked small in this plain room. The next week, Elise arrived not only on time, but early apron already in hand. She went straight to the dish pit, sleeves rolled high. No excuses. It wasn't perfection, but it was something that looked finally like humility. 6 months later, the chandeliers of the Gilded Magnolia glowed just as brightly as the night Elise had told me to eat in the street. The velvet curtains still framed the tall windows, the silver still shone like polished mirrors. Yet the air felt different, lighter somehow, as though the restaurant itself anticipated a change. This time, I was the first to arrive. Mr. Whitlow, the manager, greeted me with the same quiet respect he had always shown. "Mrs. Hale," he said warmly, "your table is ready." He led me to the center of the room, not tucked into a corner or against a wall, but a place of prominence. The chair had already been set waiting for me. I lowered myself into it, smoothing the edge of my jacket, and let the moment settle. I belonged here. The doors opened, and Elise entered with Grant and the children. She was dressed simply, not in the blazing red gowns of her old performances, but in a soft navy dress that carried no intention except presence. She looked around, caught my eye, and for the first time in years, she walked toward me instead of away. "May I sit here?" she asked quietly, touching the empty chair beside mine. I nodded once. "Yes, Elise." The table filled with the sounds of menus, opening glasses poured the clink of cutlery being set, but Elise didn't reach for the menu. Her hands rested in her lap, folded as though she had rehearsed what came next. "Mother," she said, her voice steady, but low enough that nearby diners had to lean slightly to catch the words. "I need to say something before this meal begins." Grant shifted uneasily, but she pressed on. "I humiliated you here 6 months ago. I told you that you didn't belong. I denied you a chair at your own family's table. I mocked your clothes, your apartment, your life. And I've spent every day since realizing how much I tore down, not just you, but myself." Her words rang through the room, not theatrical, but plain. The diners nearest us, who had started their meals with polite disinterest, now watched openly. A man at the next table gave the smallest nod, as though he too had been waiting for these words. Ethan's eyes shone as he stared at his mother. Lily leaned against her father, uncertain, but listening. Elise drew in a breath. "I am sorry, Mother, for the wedding I excluded you from, for the holidays where I told you your clothes weren't good enough, for every time I used the word embarrassment when I should have said gratitude. I cannot take those nights back, but I can promise never to repeat them." The restaurant was silent except for the low hum of the piano. The words once unthinkable had been spoken aloud in the very room where the wound began. I studied her carefully. She had not disguised the apology in Polish this time. She had named each harm one by one without excuse. The waiter poured wine into my glass. I raised it slowly, not as a toast, but as acknowledgement. Elise's hands trembled on the table, waiting. Whether I forgave her tonight or not was less important than this. She had finally looked truth in the eye. The lawyer's office smelled of old books and polished wood, a place where permanence lived in ink. Sunlight slanted through half-drawn blinds, striping the desk where Mr. Chambers had laid out the documents. I had sat in this room many times before each visit, carving my decisions more sharply than the last. Today was different. Mr. Chambers adjusted his glasses. "You're certain about these changes, Mrs. Hale?" "Yes," I answered. My voice didn't waver. The trust papers lay in front of me like a map of the future, one that would outlast me shaping what came after. My pen hovered above the page, but I paused, glancing at Elise in the chair across from me. She was subdued, dressed plainly, her hair pinned back without fuss. Gone was the sparkle of performance. Still caution curled in my chest. "I want to make clear," I said, speaking more to Elise than to Mr. Chambers, "that the direct funds for Ethan and Lily remain untouched. Their college accounts will continue to grow independent of anyone's choices." Elise nodded, her eyes flickering toward her children, who waited in the hall with books and headphones. "That's good," she murmured. I turned the page, resting my finger on the section Mr. Chambers had marked in blue ink. "As for Elise, I said she will regain a portion of inheritance, but modest, enough to stand as acknowledgement, not excess, and it will remain under trustee oversight." Mr. Chambers cleared his throat. "I've appointed a trustee who will release funds only under conditions you've specified. That ensures accountability." Elise swallowed hard, her hands clasped in her lap. For the first time, I sensed she wasn't calculating, only listening. "And one more clause," I added. "A new core. I want it worded precisely. Respect is the rent for a place in this family, paid weekly, not yearly." The lawyer's pen scratched across the page, immortalizing the sentence in formal script. I sat back, letting the words settle in the air. They were more than legal. They were covenant. Elise finally lifted her gaze to mine. "Weekly," she repeated softly. "Yes," I said. "It isn't about holidays or birthdays. It's about every ordinary week. A phone call, a visit, a conversation without contempt. Respect isn't seasonal, Elise. It's steady rent. Without it, the doors close." Her eyes glistened, though no tears fell. She nodded slowly, as though weighing the weight of something she hadn't carried before. Mr. Chambers slid the signature line toward me. I signed with deliberate care each stroke of my pen, pressing down the years of silence, exclusion, humiliation, and rewriting them. The paper was the same trust, but it had been signed differently this time, with boundaries woven into its fabric. When it was Elise's turn to initial, her hand trembled slightly. She pressed the pen down anyway, leaving her mark not in triumph, but in concession. Afterward, as we walked out into the bright Charleston afternoon, Ethan and Lily bounded up. Lily tugged at Elise's sleeve, chattering about her school play. Ethan glanced between us, searching my face for clues. I gave him a small smile. "It's done," I told him. Elise stood quiet beside me, the spring air tugging at her plain dress. No grand words, no sweeping gestures, only silence that held a fragile kind of agreement. The papers were signed, the future secured. Yet deep within me lingered a single question. Had we built something steady at last, or only drawn another fragile line against relapse? The evening settled over Charleston in shades of lavender and gold, the kind of dusk that softened every hard edge. From my porch, I could hear the faint hum of cicadas starting their song, the creak of the old rocker beneath me, and the bubbling laughter of my grandchildren as they perched at the wicker table with bowls in their laps. Ethan, snapped open a pea pod, the little green pearls tumbling into the bowl with a satisfying clink. "Grandma, I bet I can fill my bowl faster than Lily," he said, his grin wide. "You'll cheat." Lily shot back, sticking out her tongue. She worked carefully, her small fingers fumbling with the pods, but determined not to fall behind. I chuckled softly, easing another handful of peas into my palm. "Slow and steady wins Lily. That's how your mother learned too." "Really?" she asked, eyes bright. I nodded, remembering Elise at their age sitting on the same porch steps, with a chipped enamel bowl, her braids frizzing in the humidity. Back then, she laughed freely, never worrying who might see her. The bowls filled slowly, punctuated by bursts of laughter, when a pea shot across the porch floor, or when Ethan teased Lily for counting hers twice. Their joy wasn't forced. It came easily, spilling into the evening air. Like music, I leaned back, letting the comfort of the moment soak through me. For so many years, family dinners had been occasions of tension, of unspoken hierarchies and quiet exclusions. But here on this porch, with the porch light flickering on above us, there was no performance. Just children, just peas, just love. My phone buzzed on the wicker armrest. I reached for it absently, expecting a reminder or a message from the church bulletin. Instead, it was from Elise. "Thank you for holding the line." I stared at the words, their simplicity cutting deeper than any long-winded apology could. There was no veneer this time, no careful spin. Just gratitude stripped bare. The children didn't notice my pause. Ethan was too busy triumphantly declaring victory in the pea race, and Lily was sulking with mock drama. I smiled at them, slipped the phone face down onto the table, and reached for another pod. Grandma, who won Ethan, pressed, already sure of his answer. "You both did," I said, "because we'll have enough peas for supper and enough laughter to last longer than any race." He rolled his eyes, but his grin lingered. Lily nudged my arm, her sulk dissolving into a giggle. The porch light flickered again, steadying into a glow that pushed the shadows back. I thought of the words on that screen of the papers, signed in Mr. Chambers' office, of the countless nights when silence sat heavier than furniture in my apartment. All of it had led here, this porch, this evening, this fragile but living bridge. I didn't pick the phone back up. Some messages are best answered not with words, but with presence, with bowls of peas, with porch-light laughter, with the unshakable proof that love isn't bought or inherited, but tended week by week. The cicadas grew louder as the sky deepened to indigo. I let their song wash over me, rocking slowly, watching my grandchildren's hands work and their smiles bloom. The inheritance I once worried over seemed small compared to this. Money might build futures, but only respect and love built families. And tonight, I knew which one mattered most. The house was quiet, save for the steady tick of the clock above the mantel and the distant song of crickets outside. The grandchildren had gone home, their laughter still echoing faintly in the corners of my porch. Elise had hugged me before leaving, not stiff, not rehearsed, but quietly, as though words were unnecessary. Grant trailed behind, subdued but civil. It was enough. I sat at my writing desk, the same one I had kept for decades, its surface worn smooth by letters, grocery lists, and the ink of countless nights. Tonight, it held a single leather-bound journal, the one I had started when I realized that memory, like money, could slip away, if not recorded carefully. I opened to a fresh page, the lamp casting a circle of light that pooled across the paper. For a long moment, I simply held the pen, listening to the quiet rhythm of my own breath. Then I began to write. Wealth can be squandered, but dignity guarded becomes legacy. The words flowed steady, anchored by the truths the years had taught me. I thought of the restaurant, the missing chair, the insult delivered in public, like a sentence. I thought of the parking lot, where Elise's rage had burned hotter than shame. I thought of the training kitchen where humility first cracked the shell of her pride, and of my porch, where love returned in the simple sound of peas falling into bowls. Respect is the rent for a place in this family paid weekly, not yearly. I underlined the sentence once slowly. It was more than a clause in the trust. It was the marrow of what I wanted to leave behind. Not money, not property, not silver heirlooms to be argued over at tables, but respect, a currency that inflated with kindness and collapsed under arrogance. Turning back in the journal, I found earlier entries notes about Ethan's first piano recital, Lily's endless questions about the stars' recipes, marked with smudges of flour and butter. Between them were reflections written in quieter times about endurance and sacrifice. I had documented years of stretching myself thin so Elise could walk taller. And now I had begun documenting what it meant to reclaim myself, to set boundaries as firmly as stone markers. There was a peace in knowing that when I was gone, this journal might one day fall into the hands of my grandchildren. They would see the truth written here, not only the meals we shared, but the battles fought for dignity. They would know their grandmother was not meek, not voiceless, not erased. I paused, closing my eyes, picturing my late husband. He had always trusted me to carry both love and discipline in equal measure. I hoped he would be proud of how I had steered our family back toward something resembling honesty. The pen moved again. Inheritance is not money. It is not marble homes or glittering galas. It is not appearances maintained at the expense of truth. Inheritance is the standard you set, the lines you refuse to erase, the respect you demand even when it costs comfort. That is what endures. I set the pen down, my hand stiff from writing, and leaned back in my chair. The lamp flickered slightly as the night deepened. Outside, the porch light still glowed steady and constant. A beacon, not just for me, but for anyone willing to return with humility. I closed the journal gently and placed it on the shelf beside my recipe box. Both, I realized, were legacies, one written in ink, the other in butter stains and flour dust. Both told the story of a woman who had been underestimated, dismissed, and finally respected. The clock chimed once, a low and solemn note. I rose, turned off the lamp, and let the room settle into darkness. My boundaries had been tested, strained, and finally honored, and in their strength, I had found the truest inheritance I could leave, not wealth to be divided, but dignity to be remembered.